As the release date for Starfield gets closer, the drama doesn't seem to end. However, whether it's the release of the game going to reviewers or the game going gold, there's no shortage of information out there and no shortage of drama. And those were that was a topic that I was going to talk about today. However, Bethesda has released on their website a story so far, so I figured I would go through this as it will provide us with much needed context as to how we have got to where we are in the game. Now, I did quickly scroll through it, haven't really read anything, but it does get to a point where the game actually begins, so I figured we could go through this together, go through the actual timeline, and see, what has been happening and what led to the point where we are in the game and what challenges potentially could be awaiting us. How did the factions come to be? Did any, inceptualize throughout this timeline, or were they all kind of, brought about in some kind of insurgent way? So I figured this would be a perfect way, and I'll leave the other video probably for tomorrow or another day. But with that said, I just want to say a massive thank you to my previous video. I set you guys a challenge of around 50 likes, and man, you all smashed it, so that is absolutely amazing. So I'm gonna set this video a challenge of 100 likes. Let's reach for the stars. Hopefully we can actually get there, and yeah, on with the video. So as you can see right now, we have the on screen the story so far, and this is really well done as well. I really like it. So as you can see here, in 2050 the humans first arrive on Mars. By 2100 humans are living in space. Now I love the way the timeline is working out, because it kind of like feels like it's a proper real lived in timeline. Now about 100 years later, humans arrive in Alpha Centauri. That is 4.37 light years away from Earth. Now, I really like the fact that they're kind of relating to some, they're actually talking about this in real world numbers and real world statistics. It kind of gets that immersion into it, so that's really nice. The United Colonies are established in 2159, so only 3 years after did the kind of governmental institute, the faction that polices everything, set up once they actually arrived in Alpha Centauri. A year later, New Atlantis is founded and becomes the official capital city of the United Colonies in 2161, sorry. 7 years later, Cheyenne is settled by Solomon Coe, who founds its first settlement, Achilles City. I believe this is the Wild West City, which is pretty cool. Then, about 20 years later, Coe invites Volley to join Cheyenne in a new alliance, the Freestar Collective. The Freestar Collective is officially formed in 2189, a year after the invite. Not long after, about 5 years later, the United Colonies positions the star station called the Clinic in orbit around Deepala in the Norian system. The unaffiliated peoples of the Norian system see this as a United Colonies attempt to expand their borders and demand the United Colonies remove the Clinic. When the United Colonies refuse, the people of the Norian vote to join the Freestar Collective, who mobilize to protect the system in 2195. Now, by the next year, in response to the Freestar mobilization, the United Colonies moves a fleet into the Norian system, and Freestar responds in kind. The Norian War begins. So it didn't really take long for them from 2050, for them, 2100 to actually live in space, from 2156 to, arrive in Alpha Centauri, and, 40 years later, they're already at war with the Norian War. Now here we've got 2216, the Norian War drags on as public settlement soars. Finally, the Treaty of Norian is signed by the United Colonies and Freestar Collective in 2216, ending the conflict. The term settled systems is formalized in the treaty. Now about 5 years later, in 2221, the Freestar Rangers are founded as an elite protective and investigative force dedicated to serving all citizens of the Freestar Collective. Just over 50 years later, 2275, the Constellation is formed by Sebastian Banks. Original members include Chloe Bao, accomplished physicist, Aja Mamasa, the youngest member and Sebastian's protege, Darius Andris, botanist and specialist in Xenobora, Bernadette Laurent, wealthy heiress and adventurer, Everardo Gil, former smuggler, and Kadri Toma, biologist and physician. The lodge is built in New Atlantis to serve the needs and people of Constellation for generations to come. Now, we fast forward about 30 years, 2305, Barrett joins the Constellation. 2 years later, in 2307, the Freestar Collective begins farming on the planet of Vesta in the Lunara system. By 2308, a year later, the United Colonies claims that by establishing a colony in a 4th-star system, the Freestar Collective has violated the Treaty of Narium. Diplomatic talks break down and the United Colonies lay siege to Vesta. I guess they were just looking for a reason for, the Freestar Collective to mess up, and when they did, they were ready to pounce, killing anyone who stayed behind or was brought in to defend it. The colony war officially begins. By 2310, 3 years later, Constellation comes into possession of their first artifact and tucks it away in the Constellation archives. A year later, 2311, after several years of conflict, the colony war effectively comes to an end with the Battle of Cheyenne as a flotilla of civilian and military Freestar Collective ships takes down the major ships of the United Colony Navy using hit and run tactics. 2315, the United Colonies Vanguard is founded as part of the United Colonies' response to the Freestar Collective's use of civilian ships during the Colony War. The Vanguard is the United Colonies' own civilian navy, relying on the civilians using their own ships, who pledged to protect the United Colonies and its interests. The ultimate reward for this service? Citizenship in the United Colonies. That's pretty harsh, but I can see why people would go for it. But damn, like, if you want to get a citizenship in the United Colonies, you kind of have to sell your soul. This faction doesn't really sound that good, right? 2319, Sarah Morgan becomes the youngest head of the United Colonies Navigator Corps, though it's a short-lived position as the division is shut down in 2320. Cast adrift, but still eager to put her training to good use, Morgan joins Constellation, and that is pretty much where she is right now. 2321, 2 years later, Walter Stroud, co-owner of Stroud Eklund, of one of the settled systems, Premier Starships manufacturers, joins Constellation and becomes its primary financial backer. Pretty cool. A year later, in 2322, former Crimson Fleet pirate Vladimir Scholl joins Constellation. So as you can see, through all of that misfortune with the United Colonies, it has led way for people to kind of find their way and footing at the Constellation. By 2325, 3 years later, Sarah Morgan becomes acting chair of Constellation. Around the same time, theologian Matteo Catri joins the Constellation as well. A year later, Barrett finds the original artifact in the Constellation archives and knows it must be special. So this is where he is. So 2326 again, after months of correspondence with Sarah Morgan, graduate student and gifted scientist Noel is invited to join the Constellation. A year later, Freestar Ranger Sam Coe and his daughter Cora join the Constellation. 2328, another year later, Andrea joins Constellation. And 2328, Barrett convinces Constellation to purchase Star Station L-868 and modify it to become the Deep Space Scanner, nicknamed the Eye. And that brings us to 2330 AD, where Starfield begins. And this is pretty much it. So that's pretty interesting how, if we go back through what we're seeing here, I mean, 2156, they get to Alpha Centauri. They start the war from 56 to 96, 40 years later. They've already started the Narian War. The United Colonies was looking for any reason to basically go all out and start, another war to gain territory, and they did that with the Colony War in 2307. They kind of lived the treaty from 2196 to 2307, over 100 years But it wasn't enough for the United Colonies. They still wanted their way, and the colony was, though it didn't last very long, it probably has a lasting effect. And we see that with the amount of people that have moved around, whether it's from the Clemson Fleet, the Freestar Collective, they've all kind of navigated and migrated all towards the Constellation. And as we can see here, in like the last few years, rapidly more and more people were being assigned to the Constellation. And as we know from the information, the Constellation faction has worked behind doors in the shadows. So a lot of what they do is kind of hush hush, need to know basis, and not as out there as you would have with the other factions. To me, this is really interesting. I'm really excited for where this is going. You know, reading stuff like this just makes me more and more excited for what Starfield stands for and what it's going to be. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Are you excited? Did you enjoy this content? Don't forget, we do have that 100 like challenge. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let's have the discussion. If you want to see more content like this, do hit that subscribe button. We are also covering video game news, and I'll see you in the next video. With that said, thanks so much. Remain legend.